There's a special kind of tension that hangs over every Thanksgiving table. It's the quiet before a petty grievance detonates the entire holiday. We're skipping the turkey and serving up the real main course, the drama. Here are 55 of the most absurd, unhinged, and downright dumbest complaints that turned a festive gathering into a complete disaster. 1. A Florida man called 911 because he was unhappy with the portion size of his turkey at a family dinner. He wasn't injured, there was no crime in progress, he just felt the distribution of the dark meat was, in his words, a criminal injustice. The dispatcher had to calmly explain that the ratio of drumsticks to thighs is not a matter for law enforcement, while you can hear his cousin in the background yelling, "You ate a whole pie by yourself, Kevin." 2. The family foodie watched in horror as the host, after carving the turkey, walked to the dessert table with the same glistening knife. Before the blade could touch the apple pie, the guest yelled, "Stop!" He loudly complained that using a meat knife on a dessert was a culinary felony, arguing the savory residue would create a flavor profile of pure chaos and contaminate the delicate pie. The host just shrugged, gave the knife a quick wipe on a napkin, and cut a slice anyway. The guest naturally refused his portion due to the culinary contamination. 3. A mother-in-law watched with a tight, critical smile as her daughter-in-law proudly placed a beautifully roasted turkey on the table. After a moment of painful silence, the mother-in-law stood up, walked to the front door, and returned from her car carrying a perfectly cooked golden brown turkey of her own. She placed it on the counter and announced to the stunned family, "I just had a feeling we might need a backup." "Don't worry, dear, you'll get the hang of it eventually." It wasn't a complaint. It was a premeditated act of war. 4. The living room was a war zone, split right down the middle between die-hard Eagles fans and Cowboys fans. When the Eagles won on a last-second field goal, one side of the room erupted in joyful screaming and high fives. The Cowboys fans, the hosts, sat in stunned silence. Their brother-in-law didn't just celebrate, he complained that their sad faces were ruining his victory buzz. He accused them of poor sportsmanship for not immediately congratulating him and said their moping was casting a negative energy over the whole house. 5. As the hostess packed a huge tray of leftovers for her sister, the sister's face went cold. She looked at the mound of food, then back at the hostess with a tight smile. "What is all this? A charity project?" she asked. "Do you think we don't have food at home?" She refused to take the container, complaining later that the gesture was a condescending act of pity, implying that she couldn't afford to feed her own family. 6. A brother was furious that his sister had seated her new boyfriend in his rightful spot at the head of the dining table. After a brief, intense argument where she refused to move him, the brother calmly walked outside. Minutes later, 2 confused police officers knocked on the door. He had called 911 and reported a hostile trespassing situation, claiming an unknown man had forcefully taken over his designated position within the home. He turned a simple seating arrangement dispute into a potential police matter. 7. An American tourist in Rome filed a complaint with his hotel's concierge. He was furious that none of the local restaurants were serving a traditional Thanksgiving dinner. He couldn't believe that in the heart of Italy, he couldn't find turkey, cranberry sauce, and green bean casserole. He accused the entire city of being culturally insensitive to American holidays. What's the single most ridiculous complaint you've ever witnessed from a tourist? 8. The tension finally snapped when the mother-in-law took one hesitant bite of turkey. She visibly recoiled, dropped her fork with a clatter, and announced to the stunned table, "Oh, honey, this is just terribly dry. It's a tragedy what you've done to this poor bird." Without missing a beat, the daughter-in-law looked her dead in the eye and said, "Linda, if my cooking is so tragic for you, the front door is right there. Feel free to leave. We'll manage with one less critic at the table." 9. Let's talk about the great stuffing schism of 2019. A woman in Ohio spent 2 days making her famous sausage and cornbread stuffing. Her new son-in-law, a recently converted vegan, refused to eat it and loudly complained that its mere presence on the table was an aggressive celebration of animal suffering. The argument escalated until the father-in-law threw a dinner roll at him, shouting, "Eat the bread! You can't cancel the bread!" Honestly, who's the worst person to sit next to at your Thanksgiving table? 10. This one is a masterpiece of passive aggression. A man in Pennsylvania didn't say a word during dinner, but the next day, he sent the host, his own sister, a detailed, itemized bill. It included charges for his gas mileage to get there, a tasting fee for sampling dishes he didn't like, and an emotional labor charge for having to listen to his niece talk about her new boyfriend for 11 minutes. 11. The political fight everyone dreaded finally happened when Uncle Ron brought up the election. His nephew fired back, and soon insults like brainwashed snowflake and Fox News zombie were flying across the table. Things got physical when Ron stood up and shoved him. The nephew shoved back, sending the beautiful roast turkey tumbling off its platter and landing upside down in the mashed potatoes. Dinner was officially over, replaced by a screaming match as the family stared at their ruined feast. 12. A mother-in-law in Texas quietly seethed through the entire meal before finally lodging her complaint. It wasn't about the food, the decor, or the conversation. It was about the napkins. The hostess, her daughter-in-law, had used autumn-themed paper napkins instead of the family's heirloom cloth napkins. She called it a shocking display of disrespect for tradition and a blatant sign that the younger generation has no class. 13. The day's tension finally snapped when an uncle made a sarcastic comment about his nephew's useless liberal arts degree. The nephew fired back, calling his uncle a failed salesman. The insults escalated until the uncle stood up, knocking his chair over, and shoved his nephew hard. The nephew retaliated with a punch, and in seconds the two were brawling on the living room floor. The chaos peaked when the gravy boat was knocked over, sending a river of hot gravy cascading across the new white carpet as the rest of the family screamed. 14. A guest complained the house smelled too much like Thanksgiving, calling the scent of turkey and stuffing aggressive aromatic clutter. Without asking, she opened a window to the freezing air and plugged in her own essential oil diffuser. She tried to cleanse the space with a lavender scent, creating a bizarre smell war between the feast and a day spa. Her brother-in-law just stared at her and asked if she was trying to make the turkey taste like a yoga mat. 15. A nephew in New Jersey, who apparently lives at the gym, staged a protest mid-meal because the Thanksgiving spread was catastrophically misaligned with his current bulking cycle. He audibly scoffed at the mashed potatoes, labeling them a dirty carb source with zero nutritional upside, while the gravy was dismissed as liquid fat. Finally, he pulled out a Tupperware container of cold chicken breast and brown rice, proudly announcing that this is what real fuel looks like. His dad just stared at him and asked if he was going to bench press the dining table for dessert. 16. Because they were short on space, a 34-year-old cousin was told he'd be sitting at the kids' table. "You have got to be kidding me," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. He slumped into the tiny chair and spent the entire meal pouting, making loud comments about the adult conversation he was missing. He finally caused a huge scene when he held up his plastic Spider-Man cup like it was radioactive waste and demanded a real wine glass. 17. A woman on a new diet appointed herself the food police for the entire table. She provided a running commentary as everyone served themselves, with remarks like, "You know that has a week's worth of sugar, right?" And, "I hope you enjoy those empty, inflammatory carbs." This went on until her dad finally snapped, held up a dinner roll and said, "We get it, Marta. You're on a diet. Now let the rest of us enjoy our holiday in peace." 18. A couple brought their untrained dog, and it was a complete nightmare. It was begging, barking, and at one point put its paws right on the dining table. When the host finally asked if they could put the dog in the bedroom for a bit, the owner was deeply offended. She shot back, "Well, maybe if your house wasn't so chaotic and loud, he'd actually be able to relax." blaming everyone else for her dog's terrible behavior. 19. A 22-year-old niece refused to eat because the dining room lighting was a photographic disaster. She complained the warm light was ruining the vibe for her Instagram story. So she pulled a portable ring light from her purse and clamped it to the table. She spent the next 10 minutes art directing her turkey and potatoes under the blinding light. By the time she finally got the perfect shot, her food was ice cold. Then she complained to her mom that the host had let her food get cold. 20. The host served a beautiful homemade apple pie, but her engineer brother was not impressed. After his first bite, his slice crumbled a bit on the plate. He put his fork down and began to analyze the problem out loud. "See, your filling is too wet and the crust doesn't have enough structural integrity to handle the load," he explained to his sister. "Next year, let me know. I can help you design a pie that will actually hold its shape." 21. A father complained that his kids were being too quiet during dinner. The children were happily and silently eating their food while watching a movie on an iPad. Instead of being thankful for the peace, the father loudly complained to his wife that the screen time was robbing the family of a precious bonding opportunity. He then took the iPad away, which immediately caused both kids to start crying, completely shattering the very peace he had complained about. 22. After one bite of the homemade pumpkin pie, the mother-in-law smiled sweetly at the hostess, her daughter-in-law, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "It's a good effort, dear, but your brother-in-law's wife, her crust is just in another league, isn't it?" The complaint wasn't that the pie was bad. It was a public announcement that the person who made it simply wasn't good enough, delivered with a perfect venomous smile. 23. Here's a new one. A cousin who had just returned from a silent meditation retreat complained that the sound of everyone eating was orally aggressive. She claimed the clinking of silverware and, I quote, "the wet cacophony of chewing was disrupting her inner peace and blocking her digestive chakras." She then put on a huge pair of noise-canceling headphones and proceeded to eat her meal in complete unnerving silence, staring at everyone else like they were a pack of wild animals. 24. A man in a pristine suburban neighborhood received a formal complaint from his neighbor. It wasn't about noise or parking. It was about the 8-foot-tall inflatable turkey on his front lawn. The neighbor claimed in a lengthy text message that the tacky and cartoonishly obese lawn ornament was lowering the collective property value of the entire cul-de-sac and was an eyesore that mocked the historical solemnity of the holiday. What's the most ridiculous neighbor complaint you've ever heard? 25. It was time for the obligatory family photo. But a niece, who is a budding Instagram influencer, refused to participate. Her complaint? The host's living room decor, a cozy mix of mismatched furniture, did not align with her personal brand aesthetic. She argued that a photo in this uncurated environment would be brand damaging and confuse her followers. She then suggested everyone go outside and pose in front of a plain brick wall for a more authentic, urban chic look. 26. An aunt who insisted on helping with the dishes decided the host's kitchen was functionally illiterate. She didn't just wash plates, she started completely reorganizing the cabinets and drawers without asking. She complained that the silverware was in the wrong drawer, the mugs were too far from the coffee pot, and the spice rack was alphabetized incorrectly. The host came back to a completely rearranged kitchen and a lecture on ergonomic workflow efficiency. 27. A teenage granddaughter was given control of the Bluetooth speaker, and she put on her favorite chill-wave indie pop playlist. Her grandfather was not having it. He complained that the sad, mumbling music was sucking the joy out of the room like a happiness vacuum. He argued that Thanksgiving has a required soundtrack of Frank Sinatra or nothing at all. The conflict escalated until he tried to hijack the speaker, creating a digital tug-of-war that ended with the speaker being unplugged for the rest of the night. 28. In the middle of dessert, a conversation started about the finale of a popular TV show that ended 6 years ago. A 40-year-old uncle immediately covered his ears and screamed, "No spoilers!" He complained that he was still working his way through season 2 and that everyone at the table was inconsiderate and reckless with their plot revelations. He claimed his entire 9-year plan to eventually watch the show had been ruined and that he could no longer enjoy his pumpkin pie due to emotional distress. 29. In a fancy New York hotel, a guest filed a formal complaint because the complimentary Thanksgiving parade broadcast on his room's television wasn't in 4K resolution. He claimed the pixelated confetti and blurry Snoopy balloon completely ruined his holiday morning and demanded a full refund for his stay, plus emotional damages for having to witness what he described as a parade from 1998. 30. This might be the pettiest of them all. As guests were leaving, the hostess packed up leftovers for her sister-in-law in a disposable plastic container. The sister-in-law looked at the flimsy container, then back at the hostess, and asked with ice in her voice, "What's this? You don't trust me to bring back your good Tupperware?" She complained that being given a cheap, throwaway container was a passive-aggressive insult that implied she was a thief. The argument over the plastic box was the last thing they said to each other that night. 31. A man who had been loudly talking about his new diet for weeks took one look at the table, piled high with incredible food, and shot the hostess a dirty look. After his third helping of buttery mashed potatoes, he complained to his wife, "This is all her fault. She knows I have no self-control. She made everything so delicious on purpose. And now I'm going to gain 5 pounds." He was genuinely blaming her for cooking a great meal. 32. An uncle showed up with a fancy new meat thermometer he was dying to use. The host already had one and said he had it under control. The uncle spent the next hour hovering over the oven, complaining that the host was flying blind and was on a collision course with a dry turkey. When the turkey came out perfectly juicy, the uncle wasn't happy. He just grumbled that it was pure dumb luck and that he could have made it scientifically perfect. 33. The family's traditional backyard football game was canceled because of a sudden heavy rainstorm. One cousin, a 30-year-old man, threw a fit. He didn't just complain about the weather. He complained to the host, "Well, what are we supposed to do now? You don't have a backup plan?" He acted as if the host was personally responsible for the weather and had failed in his duty to provide alternative structured entertainment for a group of adults. 34. A guest suddenly remembered. She was allergic to cats the moment the host's friendly cat jumped onto her lap. She never mentioned this before arriving. She started sneezing dramatically and complained that she couldn't possibly stay in the same room as the animal. The host had to lock their confused cat in the bedroom, while the guest spent the rest of the night complaining about her itchy eyes and how the host really should have asked about allergies beforehand. 35. Picture a classic suburban Thanksgiving. The game is on, the food smells amazing. Then Uncle Jerry complains that the host's Wi-Fi is too slow for him to live tweet his fantasy football team's performance. He wasn't just annoyed, he argued that the subpar internet bandwidth was actively causing his players to underperform in real life and accused his brother of technological sabotage to win their family league. 36. An aunt who fancies herself an interior designer spent the meal quietly judging the host's home. She finally offered her unsolicited advice over dessert. "You know, a mirror on that wall would really open up the space," she said, before complaining that the low-wattage light bulbs were casting unflattering shadows and making everyone look tired. She was essentially giving the host's dining room a failing grade. What's the most backhanded compliment you've ever received from a relative? 37. An elderly grandfather complained that the mashed potatoes were too smooth. He insisted that real, authentic mashed potatoes should have lumps to prove they were made from actual potatoes and not some instant chemical powder from a box. He poked at the creamy, buttery potatoes with his fork and declared them suspiciously perfect, refusing to eat them because they lacked the rustic, lumpy texture he grew up with. 38. A guest complained that the volume of the football game on TV was emotionally inappropriate. He argued that the loud cheers and announcers' excited shouting were creating a jarring and stressful atmosphere that clashed with the calm, grateful spirit of Thanksgiving. He then asked if they could just watch the game on mute with subtitles, a suggestion that was met with looks of pure horror from the rest of the family. 39. After a guest used the downstairs bathroom, she came out and complained to the hostess, in front of several people, that the hand soap was disappointing. She said the generic unscented soap was uninspired, and that for a holiday gathering, she expected something more festive like a cranberry or a spiced pumpkin. She was literally critiquing the soap choice as if it were one of the dinner courses. 40. A guest in Connecticut, a self-proclaimed wine connoisseur, brought a $100 bottle of French Bordeaux as a hostess gift. He presented it with a grand flourish, only to watch in silent horror as the host uncorked it and poured half of it into the gravy pan. The man didn't just complain, he held an impromptu intervention. He accused the host of committing a culinary war crime and desecrating the soul of the vineyard. He then refused to drink any other wine served, stating his palate was too traumatized to continue. 41. You're not going to believe this one. A man complained about the geometry of his turkey slices. He argued that the host's carving technique produced aerodynamically unstable pieces of meat that were too difficult to balance. He claimed a proper slice needs a low center of gravity for a stable journey from plate to mouth. He then proceeded to lecture the table on cantilevered loads and rotational torque, using a dinner roll as a prop to demonstrate the fork's fulcrum point. 42. After the host asked a guest for the third time if she needed a drink refill, the guest slammed her hand on the table. "Stop!" she yelled. She complained that the host's relentless and oppressive hospitality was giving her performance anxiety. She claimed the constant checking in was creating intense psychological pressure to hydrate on his schedule, and that she needed a safe space to be thirsty without judgment or intervention. 43. The host had a perfectly behaved elderly golden retriever that spent the evening sleeping in a corner. A guest complained that the dog was making her uncomfortable because it was too quiet. "He hasn't barked once. It's unnatural," she whispered. "He's just lying there, staring. I feel like I'm being silently audited by a dog. It's like he knows all my secrets and is judging my life choices with every slow blink." 44. Get this. A guest who tracks his fitness with a smartwatch complained that the layout of the host's house was detrimental to his health goals. He argued that the close proximity of the living room, dining room, and bathroom meant he wasn't getting enough steps. "This floor plan is far too efficient," he griped, looking at his watch. "At my house, a trip to the kitchen is 50 steps. Here, it's 15. I'm actually losing progress by being here. I'll never close my rings." 45. A woman dropped a piece of gravy-covered turkey onto her new sweater. She didn't blame herself. She glared at the host and complained, "There's something wrong with your table." When asked what she meant, she explained, "It's not level. The gravitational pull is clearly weaker on this side, which caused the meat to float right off my fork. It's a localized anomaly." She was dead serious, demanding he get a level to check it. Have you ever witnessed someone blame a law of physics on their host? 46. A guest proudly brought her famous homemade macaroni and cheese, the one dish she brings every year. She watched as every other side dish was brought to the table, but hers remained on the kitchen counter. When the host started serving dinner, the guest stood up and asked, "I'm sorry, was there something wrong with my dish?" The host mumbled something about running out of space, but the message was clear. The woman complained to her husband that this was a deliberate and public snub, designed to humiliate her in front of the whole family. 47. A couple's 3-year-old was having a tough time, refusing to eat and whining a bit at the table. The host's sister watched this with a tight smile before leaning over and saying, "You know, a little discipline goes a long way. If you were more firm with him at home, we wouldn't all have to listen to this." The complaint wasn't just about a crying child. It was a direct public attack on their entire parenting style, delivered like a piece of friendly advice. 48. After sitting down for dinner, a guest sniffed the air dramatically. She then leaned over to her husband and whispered, just loud enough for the host to hear, "I love them, but I just wish their house didn't smell so much like dog." The complaint was a quiet bomb, a deeply personal insult suggesting the hosts lived in a dirty home. The hostess heard it, said nothing, and the rest of the dinner was coated in a thick, awkward silence. 49. An aunt decided that her 28-year-old nephew was being too quiet and secretive. She complained, "You come here and you never tell us anything about your life." She then launched into a public interrogation, asking increasingly personal questions. "Are you seeing anyone? How much are they paying you at that new job? When are you going to buy a house instead of throwing your money away on rent?" Her complaint was just a cover for being aggressively nosy and making him the uncomfortable center of attention. 50. In a truly nuclear moment, a mother turned to her unmarried 35-year-old daughter and sighed. "I just don't get it," she complained, motioning toward her other daughter, who was married with 2 kids. "Look at your sister. She has her life together. She's happy. Why can't you just be more like her?" The complaint wasn't just a complaint, it was a direct comparison designed to wound, and it was delivered in front of the very sibling she was being compared to. You could have heard a pin drop. 51. An uncle spent the first hour of the visit staring at the host's brand new wall-mounted television. During dinner, he finally made his move. He complained that seeing such an expensive purchase made him worried about the host's financial discipline. It was a thinly veiled jab, suggesting his nephew was irresponsibly burning through money that would, one day, be part of the family inheritance. 52. The hostess noticed her aunt staring at her throughout the meal. Finally, the aunt cornered her by the dessert table. With a look of fake concern, she complained that the hostess looked tired and bloated. It was a brutal, personal attack on her appearance, disguised as a comment about her health, and it was clearly meant to make her feel self-conscious in her own home on a day she worked hard to create. 53. A sister-in-law repeatedly offered to help in the kitchen, and each time the hostess politely said she had it under control. This did not go over well. The sister-in-law later complained to her husband, just loud enough for others to hear, that the hostess was a control freak. She framed it as a complaint that she wasn't allowed to contribute, but the real message was an accusation that the hostess needed to be a martyr and couldn't stand anyone else getting any credit. 54. As a parting gift, the host gave each family member a small framed photo from a happy moment the previous summer. One cousin looked at the thoughtful, personal gift with a sigh of annoyance. He later complained that now he had an obligation to find a place for it on his wall. He treated a genuine, heartfelt present not as a gift, but as a chore and a piece of emotional clutter he was now burdened with. 55. And for the grand finale. The matriarch of the family, the grandmother, waited until everyone was served and the room fell quiet. She looked around the table, made eye contact with each of her children, and complained that the entire holiday felt fake. She said she could feel the tension, that nobody really wanted to be there, and that perhaps this should be the last year they all pretend to be a happy family. It was a complaint that invalidated the entire day, and it detonated like a bomb in the center of the room, leaving nothing but shocked silence in its wake. So there you have it. 55 reasons why, for many families, Thanksgiving is less about gratitude and more about survival. Now, after all that chaos, we have a simple question for you. Do you celebrate Thanksgiving? And if you do, what's the real tradition in your house? Is it a genuinely peaceful family feast? Or is it mostly just an excuse to eat a ton of food and watch football? Let us know your style in the comments below. If you enjoyed the dysfunction, show some support by hitting that like button and subscribe for more. We'll see you next time.